Well, Harry Cole is the political editor of The Sun. He's also presenting today on Drive between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock, and I'm delighted that he's here in the studio with me today. Harry, you've got quite the guest coming up later on.
Well, it's going to be a lively afternoon. We've got Nigel Farage. He's written for The Sun today. Big page 10 in The Sun, all about how the lunacy of net zero is decimating Britain's industry, and that's why he thinks he's ahead of Labour in the Northern Heartland. So we'll stress test that theory later. He's going to take some calls from Sun readers, from Talk listeners. We've got the government minister Luke Pollard coming on, the Armed Forces minister. It couldn't be more timely as we're about to, could potentially send British troops to Ukraine, which isn't necessarily the most thought-out plan, I think. And then we'll have some Tories on as well, who are obviously cock-a-hoop about all of this two-tier stuff. Which
and we'll talk about that in a second. We've heard, of course, from Robert Jenrick on this earlier on today, but also just specifically what you're talking about there in regard to Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky is in Brussels. He's thanked European leaders for their support at today's summit. During all this period last week, you've stayed with us. From all Ukrainians, we have a big appreciation. We're all very thankful. We are not alone. These are not just words. We feel it, and it's been called a watershed moment by Chesney Hawkes lookalike Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission. Where do you think this is going, Harry?
Well, I think the sort of the penny is dropping, or the euro centime is dropping across the channel, in the fact that you saw what Donald Trump said. He is not going to pay up anymore, and I think the European countries for so long have, as Macron admitted in his speech last night, have lived on the US taxpayers' subsidy, and so I think they're going to bang their heads together, I hope, and agree some format of another big funding round for Ukraine to get them through to the summer, as the US have turned off the taps temporarily, we hope, and also how they're going to get their defence spending up. I think the critical mistake they will make, though, and I can see them walking into this, is they're going to have such a strop that they're going to go, we don't need NATO, we're going to have our own EU army, we're going to have our own EU defence pact, we're going to go completely the wrong direction, set up another pointless Brussels-based bureaucracy, easy for me to say, good luck trying to repeat that one, and end up wasting billions of pounds, billions and billions and billions of euros, setting up their own thing, when actually they should just cough up, get their defence spending up and contribute to NATO properly.
And Lavrov has said this morning that he would consider, and Russia would consider, any NATO troops or troops from any NATO country as hostile forces, essentially.
Well, this is a negotiation at the end of the day. I think the reason that Donald Trump is being so sort of aggressive to the Ukrainians and sort of lavishing praise on the Russians, it isn't really some sort of Russian agent or anything, that nonsense like that. I think basically he promised to end the war in 24 hours. He promised to end the war in a week. He promised to end the war in, what would he now, 45 days into his presidency, and there's no sign of this war ending. I think he is slightly beginning to think he is overpromised and he's potentially going to underdeliver on this. There's no sign of the Russians coming to the table at the moment. It is a negotiation, but I think Trump has realised that he needs to be seen as a sort of fair player between the two sides by the Kremlin before they can even consider coming to the table. So I think he's slightly trying to rebalance it's not very edifying to watch, and it's actually quite uncomfortable to watch, but he's trying to send a signal to the Russians that if you do a negotiation with the US as the sort of middleman, it will be a fair negotiation, because at the moment Putin's looking at this going, why am I going to come to the table when the cards are already stacked against me?
I'm not playing cards.
Zelensky said. It's going to be a long day if we start doing our accents.
Well, it certainly is. Let's not do that. Let's do that. We'll be doing Keir Starmer impressions in a minute. Yeah, the Metropolitan Police. Right. Let's talk about two-tier justice in this country. This is a very, very serious issue. I'm really worried about it. Sue Carr exceeding her brief by the sound of things.
Oh, look, this has obviously been, the Sentencing Council. This is what happens when you sort of you allow these independent quangos and sort of arm's length bodies too much power, and then stuff them full of a bunch of pinkos. This is what happens. They end up.
She's the Lady Chief Justice of this country. She's earned her position. She's not just some pinko.
No. I'm talking about if you look at the committees, look at the committees and the boards and the bodies that make up all of these things. We went through this a few years ago with the parole board. Do you remember when they tried to let out John Warboys because he was the black cab rapist was a nice reformed fella? Come on, and they had to have this exact same battle where the Secretary of State, the Lord Chancellor, had to essentially crack the whip and say no. That did end up changing the law. We ended up actually having transparency on the parole boards, and so we can actually see who are these people that are making these decisions. Look, this decision is clearly crackers. The Secretary of State is saying that actually she has no power to stop it, because it's going to come into force on the 1st of April by hook or by crook. That's wrong. She has the power to change the law. Labour have a massive stonking majority. Kemi Badenoch's out this morning and saying, we will back you. a one-line bill to say this is not happening.
Yeah.
Parliament are the lawmakers. For too long, we keep seeing this. We saw it under Sunak as well, and Keir Starmer does it the whole time. He goes, oh, well, it's the law. The law should... Well, if the law is an ass, change the law.
Yes.
What is the point of having this stonking great majority if you're going to do nothing with it? And so I think it's a really interesting first test, I think. This is I think, actually, probably the most effective and damaging thing the Tories in opposition have done. They've dug up so far. So they've had 8 months in opposition. They haven't been that great. They need to... they've sort of been sort of shell-shocked from their defeat all over the place. They went through that long leadership election. This is actually the first proper old-school bit of opposition causing the government maximum pain. It was a complete hijack yesterday in the House when Jemrick, who is a very talented man by all, as we were beginning to see, basically jumped to the Secretary of State. She had no idea what it was.
She was completely blindsided.
And then when she found out about it, she was furious. Now, look, you can say, and I know you've been defending us today, and I think, look, she's saying the right things, but the fact is that it was able to go through her private office, through the entire MOJ without someone spotting it. Why did no one go, sorry?
Or they did spot it and said nothing, which is worse.
Yes, exactly.
Which is worse. Now, having worked in the Ministry of Justice, and government more generally, as you know, Harry, it's 99% cock up, 1% conspiracy, and I just don't think there's a cabal running the world because they're not that organised. Or thought it was fine.
Or thought it was a good idea.
I thought it was a good idea, or thought, you know what, we'll not bother the Secretary of State with this because she'll think it's fine.
She's in Texas looking at prisons. I mean, come on, this is it's all very well flying around the world, looking hard by visiting big prisons in America, but actually this, she's being humiliated here, and it's very, very embarrassing.
Harry, what is Nigel Farage writing about? Tell us a bit more about the article for those who perhaps haven't seen it in the Sun today.
He has written about the deindustrialisation of Britain, which I think would be the FT headline. The Sun headline is net zero lunacy is decimating British industries. Looking at the chemicals industries, the cement industries, oil refineries, all of this stuff is on the altar of the drive to net zero. And we know we've talked a lot about how people are going to need to get heat pumps and electric cars and insulate their homes, and the domestic sort of cost to the household budget of this drive to net zero. And it's not 2050. There's some serious targets kicking in for decarbonisation of industry, and it means that we're losing all of these plants, we're losing all of these jobs. People are scrambling around to try and find new work, and these are in areas that are traditionally Labour strongholds, where reforms seem to be, if you believe Nigel Farage, if you believe the polls, doing incredibly well. And he puts that not down to his own wit and charm, but the fact is that people are seeing their livelihoods be sacrificed on the altar of a political ideology, which is the drive to net zero by 2050. And it is breaking British industry, and there's going to be nothing left. And what replaces it? These mythical jobs in green and wind and solar and going to be a security guard at a massive data farm, which they want to build on ring roads around Britain. It's not going to... The transition it's basically breaking stuff down too quickly without rebuilding it. And there's going to be a crunch coming, and that's what I think he's going to capitalise on.
Philip, there are plenty of questions for Nigel Farage later on, I'm sure. Maybe on net zero, maybe on Ukraine, maybe in something else. What would you ask him if you were suggesting to Harry what to grill Nigel Farage on?
Oh, there's so much. Nigel, I'd like to understand whenever what's going to be the trigger for him to take this group of mates that is Reform in Parliament at the minute and start to develop it into a proper political entity. Is he waiting for the local election results before he does that and everything else? But the other thing more widely that I think we need to drill into is the fact that if the EU goes down this line of creating some form of new EU force, which I agree, I think they might try and do. Macron's speech last night was him fighting with Starmer over who's got control in Europe. Why people aren't looking at what NATO has a plan already, and it's got a plan already where the United States doesn't come into a NATO operation. It's purely EU plus Canada and others that come in. That's been practiced. That's why the Deputy Supreme Commander was always a British and is always a British officer, so that if the Americans say we're not playing, they can step up and the Europeans can come in, and the EU countries have all signed up to that, apart from those that are neutral like Ireland and all the rest of it. We're not hearing that talked about. We should be hearing more of that.
How long have you got him for?
Hopefully about a good half an hour, so we'll get some...
Plenty to get through.
Absolutely, but we'll get some listeners calls in. We'll hope to get some WhatsApps in. And
wonderful stuff.
I've been practicing the number.
Excellent, yes. Get it right.
Tongue twister, isn't isn't it?
Well, it's literally written in front of you there, which is
99 1000. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, exactly.
There we go.
Very
See?
good.
I've written it on my hand as well.
Oh, very good, very good. Yes, excellent. Maybe you can put it on a contact lens and have it
Exactly.
in your eye. It's imprinted in my brain anyway.